G'day and welcome back to Project 300. With the spare tyre relocation taken care of, thanks to the Kmart rear bar, it's enabled two of the most important additions for remote travel, a long-range fuel tank and a water tank. If you've been following the build, you'll know that I tend to stick with products that I know and trust, and fuel tanks are no exception. I've been using out-of-town four-wheel drives, the LongRanger tanks, since the early 1990s, first in a Nissan Patrol, followed by 105 and 200 series LandCruisers, and now for the 300. It's ironic that I'm currently preparing the 300 for a Canning stock route trip, and going through my old four-wheel drive magazines, I came across this 1987 edition of Bush Driver where they tackled the Canning. And what should I find on the inside front cover but an ad for out-of-town four-wheel drives fuel tanks. They've been making them here in Australia for over 40 years. For the Cruiser this time, I've also added LongRanger's stainless steel water tank as part of their dual tank system for the 300 series. This involves removing the centre-mounted sub-fuel tank and replacing it with this 60-litre stainless steel water tank. A new 152-litre sub-fuel tank is then added to the rear of the Cruiser, replacing the spare tyre. This gives you a total fuel capacity of 232 litres, more than doubling the standard touring range of the vehicle. The additional range not only makes outback travel easier, but can also greatly reduce trip costs because you can minimise or even skip completely the purchase of fuel at the most expensive remote locations. Now it's time to climb under the Cruiser and get the tanks installed. Ideally, you should have less than half a tank of fuel before commencing the installation. The fuel tank will be installed first. Before you begin work, check that you have the correct tanks and all the parts are present. You should then vacuum out both the tanks just to ensure that no foreign matter has made its way inside them. Then move under the vehicle and remove the exhaust from the transfer case back. Start by disconnecting the flanges beside the transfer case and also in front of the rear diff. Then drop the exhaust sections off their rubber hangers and set them aside. Spraying the rubber hangers with WD-40 will help them come off more easily. If you haven't already done so, drop the spare wheel out of the vehicle and set it aside. This is achieved by removing the cover plate above the rear step, then using the factory toolkit to lower the tyre. Then remove the 4 bolts securing the tyre support crossmember to its brackets, and remove and discard the crossmember. You can then remove the 2 brackets from either side chassis rail and discard them. You then need to use a recip saw or similar to carefully cut the 2 tyre hangers off the forward crossmember. Ensure you wear appropriate safety equipment and that there are no disconnected fuel lines or exposed fuel. Next, remove the bolts securing the heat shield and remove and discard the shield. You can then use the recip saw to cut off the 2 forward bolts that were securing the shield to the floor. The final cut is to remove the unused hanger on the rear crossmember. Once all of these pieces have been removed, apply some suitable paint or primer to all the exposed metal on the crossmembers and on the cut-off bolts to ensure they don't rust. Next, examine the fuel filter. If required, swivel the hose clamps of the 2 fuel lines so they're oriented with the open sections facing down. This is for easy removal of the filter when required. Then move to the rear of the sub-fuel tank located on the left side of the vehicle. Find the rubber filler hose and fully loosen the rearmost hose clamp. Then slide the hose off the filler pipe. Support the tank on a jack or stand. Then remove the tank straps, first by undoing the bolts, then removing and discarding the straps. Retain the bolts for reuse later. You can then lower the tank about 100 millimetres and disconnect the fast fill breather by pushing out the red clip and separating the join. Then remove the second red clip on the hose between the floor and the chassis. Retain the red clips for reuse later. Remove the sender's small rubber hose from the metal pipe, leaving the other end attached to the sender unit. Next, release the white clip on the small fuel pickup line and disconnect it from the metal fuel pipe. Continue lowering the tank and remove it from the vehicle, disconnecting the wiring connector as you do so. Move over to the rear of the main tank on the other side of the vehicle. Release the white clip on the small fuel line and disconnect the line from the metal fuel pipe. Then release the grey clip on the breather line and disconnect the breather. Retain the grey clip for reuse later. Move up into the tight space between the cross member and the floor. Remove the bolt securing the saddle over the filler pipe. Unclip the small fuel pipe, remove it and discard. Then remove and discard the breather pipe and the 90-degree plastic bracket. Then replace the bolt in the saddle clamp to hold the filler pipe securely. Use a paint marker to mark the rubber filler line, halfway along the straight section closest to the filler pipe. Use a sharp knife to carefully cut the filler tube all the way through. Then loosen the hose clamp on the filler pipe end and swivel that piece of the hose 180 degrees as shown. Place the supplied hose clamps over each of the cut ends, then insert the supplied T-piece into both hoses as shown. Leave the hose clamps loose for now. Move to the original sub-tank and remove the filler hose from the tank. Insert the supplied plug into the end removed from the tank and then secure using the original hose clamp. Then move back under the vehicle and secure the blanked off tube to the filler pipe using the original factory clamp removed earlier. Orientate the tube towards the floor to allow clearance for the water tank. Now move to the left rear of the vehicle. Using 2 of the tag bolts, sit the left side bracket into position on the chassis rail. Use a paint marker to mark the location for the 3rd hole. Drill it out to 9mm, then deburr and paint the hole to prevent rust. If you have a rear bar fitted, you may need to temporarily remove the rearmost mounting bolt to provide access for the tag nuts. Insert the 3 tag bolts in through the rectangular hole on the chassis rail as shown, and bend the tags to get all 3 out through the tank mounting holes. Sit the bracket into position on the tag bolts, then fully secure using the supplied nuts, flat and spring washers. I'm also adding a little bit of Loctite. If you have a rear bar, you'll need to trim the tags and refit and torque the mounting hardware for the bar. Then move to the right side of the vehicle. Again remove the rear bar mounting bolt if required and insert the 3 tag nuts. There's no need to drill an extra hole on this side. Secure the bracket as for the other side, with nuts, spring and flat washers and Loctite if desired. Then resecure the rear bar if applicable. Using care not to pinch any wiring, install the longer of the 2 supplied U-bolts over the cross member above the rear axle, so that one leg goes through the hole on the right side spring mount. Now move back to the sub-tank removed from the vehicle. Unclip the white trim cover on the sender unit ring, then tap a large flat blade screwdriver to release the black swivel collar securing the sender to the top of the tank. With the lugs disengaged, you can lift the sender unit out of the tank. Remove the metal ring from the top of the sender unit. Then locate and mark the 2 plastic tabs on the top of the sender. Use side cutters to trim the tabs down by 3mm. Give the sender a good clean to avoid contaminating the new tank. Then remove the hose clamp securing the L-shaped fuel line to the sender and remove the fuel line. Cut the straight section of the line off at a length of about 50mm. Then refit the cut length to the sender and secure it with the original clamp. Locate the small plug from the installation kit and insert it into the other end of the line to block it. Secure with the original hose clamp. Install the supplied O-ring into the recessed groove on the top of the new tank, then drop the sender into the hole. Align it as shown with the plastic tabs engaging in the slots in the top of the tank. Place the supplied metal ring over the sender, then secure the sender and the ring using the 8 supplied screws, gradually tightening the screws following an opposite pattern like tightening wheel nuts. Then take the 38mm filler hose and fit it over the pipe in the tank. Secure to the tank using the supplied hose clamp. Fit a quick release fitting to each of the supplied 16mm breather hoses. Secure the fittings using the supplied hose clamps. Then fit the shorter 900mm hose to the higher of the 2 tank fittings as shown and secure it with the supplied hose clamp. Connect the longer 1300mm hose to the lower of the 2 tank fittings and also secure it using the supplied hose clamp. Then connect the 8 by 1400mm system breather hose to the plastic rollover valve on the top of the tank and secure it using the supplied hose clamp. Fit the supplied small quick connect fittings to each end of the 8 by 1200mm pickup hose. Secure the fittings using the supplied hose clamps. Then connect one end of the hose to the female fitting on the sender unit. Use multi-grips to close the quick connect clamp as shown. Next, open the bonnet, remove the battery cover and disconnect the negative battery cable. Then move under the car and cut the factory multi-core sender wire about 80mm from the plug. Use the supplied 3-core loom to extend the sender wiring. While crimp terminals are supplied, it's better to solder the wiring together, ensuring that you match the colours correctly at either end of the extension. Insulate all the soldered joints individually using heat shrink tubing. Then insulate the whole loom using larger heat shrink, and finally tape over the wiring and the heat shrink to finish the join to the factory loom. Run the extended loom along the chassis rail and over the cross member, then leave it hanging ready to connect to the new tank. Position the new tank under the rear of the vehicle. Pass all of the breather and small fuel lines over the cross member ready for connection to the original systems. Lift the tank slightly, then connect the sender loom to the sender unit and pass the 38mm filler hose over the cross member. Cable tie the sender loom to the filler hose to keep it safe from fouling on the floor. Continue gradually raising the tank under the vehicle, front first. Guide the various fuel lines as you raise the tank to ensure they run neatly without fouling or kinking. As you continue moving it into the final position, sit the right side rear on top of its mounting bracket. Then push the tank forward and lift it onto the left side rear bracket. Then connect the filler hose to the metal T-piece. Don't tighten the hose clamp just yet. Install the other supplied U-bolt over the cross member and loosely fit the flat washers and nylock nuts to both of the U-bolts. Push the rear of the tank upwards to check for clearance between the tank and the floor and wiring. It should easily move up at least 12mm. If it doesn't, check for obstructions such as hoses or wiring and relocate them if required. Ensure the tank is located centrally from left to right, then loosely install the rear mounting bolts with flat washers and nylock nuts. Double check clearance all round and then first tighten the front U-bolts followed by the rear mounting bolts. Tighten the 3 hose clamps on the 38mm filler hose and T-piece. Next, connect the fast fill breather hose to the red clip factory breather pipe on the left side of the vehicle. These quick release fittings are a bit fiddly. First, partially insert the red clip into the fitting by bending the inner legs, then guiding them into the inner holes until the outer legs engage. Then, once you've pushed the male fitting into the female, you can use multi-grips to finish engaging the retaining clip. Then connect the 8mm system breather hose to the barbed factory fuel pipe and secure using the supplied hose clamp. The next connection is the second quick release breather hose, which needs to be connected to the grey breather fitting on the main fuel tank. This is connected exactly the same way as the red breather fitting connected earlier. The final fuel line connection is to attach the 8mm transfer line to the quick connect fitting on the main tank. Then lock the fitting by clamping with multi-grips. You then need to thoroughly secure all of the fuel lines, pipes and sender wiring using cable ties to ensure that they're all well protected against movement, chafing and heat from the exhaust system. Pay particular attention to potential movement of suspension. Don't refit the exhaust yet as it needs to remain off for the water tank installation. Begin the water tank install on the left side rear wheel arch. Twist off the securing nuts for the front 2/3 of the felt liner. Then pull the front half of the felt liner down to expose the fuel filling pipes towards the front of the arch. Then move to the pump and installation hardware for the water tank kit. Unbox the pump, then remove and discard the sealing bungs on the inside of the pump inlet and outlet. Then apply a generous amount of Teflon sealing tape to the threads on the pump inlet and outlet. Ensure you wind the tape clockwise, looking at the end of each thread. Then fit the supplied barbed elbows to both the pump inlet and outlet. Next, prepare the pump wiring. Select a suitable earth point. Either leave the black wire long and find a point on the chassis, or do as I am by trimming it and soldering it onto an eye terminal for placement under one of the pump mounting feet. Using this method, you'll need to ensure the stainless bracket is well earthed to the chassis when you mount it. Use the supplied nuts and bolts to mount the pump to the bracket. Include a star washer under the earth wire to ensure a good connection. To aid with installation later, check the small flow arrow on the back of the pump and mark it clearly on both sides using a paint marker. I then found it easier to mount the inlet and outlet hoses to the pump before mounting the pump to the chassis. Attach the 0.7 metre length of hose to the pump inlet and the 2 metre hose to the pump outlet. Dipping the ends in hot water will make fitment easier. Secure both hoses using the supplied hose clamps. Feed the 3 tag bolts through from the inside of the chassis rail and out the 3 holes on the outer wall of the chassis rail as shown. You can temporarily attach a nut to hold them as you manipulate them into place. Attach the bracket using the supplied flat and spring washers and nuts. Once the bracket's loosely fitted, torque all 3 nuts. Attach the supplied power cable to the positive wire on the pump. For best results, solder the connection and apply heat shrink tube over the join. To reduce the chance of chafing, encase the cable in split tube. Then run the power cable and the water outlet hose together along the left side chassis rail towards the rear of the vehicle where the tap and switch will be located. We'll continue running these later in the installation. Now move back under the vehicle in preparation for installing the tank. Drill out the 2 6mm holes in the factory tank strap bracket as shown. It's located just above the front of the rear tail shaft. These holes need to clear M8 bolts, so an 8.5mm drill bit should be suitable. Paint the holes to prevent rust. Connect the 10mm fast breather hose to the top of the tank and secure it using the supplied hose clamp. Then connect the supplied 90-degree threaded barbed elbow to the bottom fitting of the tank. Use thread tape and finish with the barbed tail facing upwards. Take the supplied M6 tag bolt and the curved tag nut and install them into the cross member as shown. The nut is inserted through the slot next to the chassis rail and manipulated through the cross member to the large hole as shown. The M6 bolt goes through a hole in the cross member itself and passes through to the small hole next to the tag nut. Run the breather hose over the chassis rail, then lift the water tank up into position. Loosely fit a couple of the fasteners into position to hold the tank in place. Move to the front of the tank and insert the double tag nut into position and loosely fit the supplied bolts, flat and spring washers. Then loosely install 2 of the original bolts to the rear outer mount. Next, install an original bolt into the front outer mount. Finally, install the supplied bolt, nut, spring and flat washers to secure the inner rear mount. Check for clearance all around the tank and that all hoses are free and not kinked anywhere around the tank. Once you're happy with the positioning, fully tighten all of the mounting bolts. I suggest applying Loctite to all bolts. Run the breather line up into the wheel arch alongside the fuel filler lines. Form a loop in the line, then run it back down so the end hangs between the tank and the chassis rail where it won't drip onto the chassis. Secure the breather line loop to the other lines and brackets using the supplied cable ties, ensuring you don't pinch or kink the line. You can then push the felt liner back up into the guard and re-secure it using the original clips. While you're working in the guard, continue to run the water outlet line and the power cable along the top of the chassis rail, securing it along the way using the supplied cable ties. Now it's time to assemble the tap. I'll be installing the tap under the rear bar wing, but you can choose a different location and bracket setup depending on your requirements. In my case, I assembled the stainless steel bracket into a right angle, then attached the straight barbed fitting onto the end of the tap and a 45-degree male-female adapter onto the other end, using it to clamp the tap to the bracket. Thread tape is required on all connections. Secure the hose to the tap assembly using the supplied hose clamp. Then secure the bracket in the chosen location. Move back under the tank and trim the pump inlet hose to the correct length to attach to the barbed fitting on the back of the tank. Dip it in some warm water, slip it onto the fitting and secure using the supplied hose clamp. Now move under the bonnet and run the filler hose between the radiator and the airbox down towards the chassis rail. Move into the front wheel arch and continue to run the hose over the chassis rail towards the rear. Leave enough hose in the engine bay to reach the top of the radiator. Fit the supplied plastic barb, cap and hose clamp to the end of the filler hose, but don't tighten the clamp yet. Remove one of the radiator mounting bolts and install the supplied stainless bracket as shown. Then refit the bolt to secure the bracket. Mount the hose and fitting to the bracket by running the hose clamp around it and then tightening it. Take up any slack in the filler hose and secure it all the way along its run using the supplied cable ties, ensuring it can't foul on any sharp edges. Move under the vehicle, trim the filler hose and secure it to the tank inlet using the supplied hose clamp. Then secure the hose to prevent chafing using the supplied cable ties. Now move to the left rear corner of the vehicle under the jack compartment. Find and remove the small black grommet next to the plastic fitting. Snip a hole in the grommet and feed the pump power cable up into the jack compartment. Secure the rest of the cable using cable ties. Then seal the grommet using some silicone or Sikaflex. Then move up inside the car into the load area. The normal location for the pump isolation switch is inside the jack compartment. But because I'm going to have a fridge module in the back of the car which will obstruct the panel, I'm instead installing the switch directly into the plastic trim. You'll need to drill a 20mm hole in the trim to mount the switch if you also want to do it this way. A power source is required for the switch. I already have power in the jack cavity, courtesy of a Richards Auto power outlet which also provides Anderson and cigarette lighter sockets powered from the fuse box on the other side of the load area. If you don't have such a setup, you'll need to run power to the jack cavity yourself, either from the fuse box on the other side of the car or a fused supply from the battery itself. Wire the switch by soldering either of the blue wires to the pump cable, the other blue wire and the red wire to the fused power supply cable, and the black wire to a suitable earth. Heat shrink all connections to prevent shorts, then bundle and tape the loom. Install the switch into the chosen location and secure with the lock nut. Then fit the loom plug to the back of the switch. Fill the tank with fresh water, check for water leaks and test the pump operation. The pump should operate automatically when the tap is opened and stop when the tap is closed, with the switch only being required as an isolator. Complete the installation by reinstalling all of the original exhaust components into position and hanging them using the original rubber mounts. Then rejoin the two flanges located next to the transfer case and in front of the rear axle. Finally, completely fill the fuel tank and check for correct operation and for any fuel leaks. I only installed the LongRanger tanks a week before we headed off to one of the most remote four-wheel drive tracks in Australia, the Canning Stock Route, where there's almost 1,000 kilometres of desert between fuel stations. Without a long-range tank, that means carrying a lot of jerry cans. And this was the first time I've had an integrated water tank in one of my four-wheel drives, and it was worth its weight in gold. The 60 litres was more than enough for drinking and washing for the gaps between communities, so there was no need to risk using questionable well water along the way, or trying to fit multiple water containers inside the car. The Australian-made LongRanger tanks performed brilliantly on the trip, over terrain that saw an imported tank on one of our convoy vehicles crack and fail before we even reached the halfway point, resulting in an early exit from the Canning. When it comes to fuel and water storage, quality is vital. I hope you enjoyed the installation of the LongRanger fuel and water tanks. Please visit project300.com.au for more 300 series ideas, modifications and accessory installs. See you next time.